The dusty ledger fell from Amelia Harper's trembling hands and hit the worn floorboards of her kitchen with a sound that seemed to echo through the empty ranch house like a death knell. She stared at the columns of numbers that had consumed her last 3 sleepless nights, each figure representing another piece of her late husband's legacy slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. The ranch that Thomas had built from nothing over 15 years now stood mortgaged to the hilt, buried under promissory notes she had never known existed until the banker arrived at her door 6 weeks after they lowered Thomas into the hard California earth. San Pedro, California, in the spring of 1883, was a place where the Pacific Ocean met cattle country, where ships unloaded goods in the harbor while ranchers drove their herds through the dusty streets toward the stockyards. Amelia had arrived here as a bride of 19, fresh from Sacramento with stars in her eyes and love in her heart for the charismatic rancher who had swept her off her feet at her cousin's wedding. That was 8 years ago, when the world had seemed full of promise and the ranch had been a modest but thriving operation. Now, at 27, she stood alone in that same kitchen, a widow with no children to comfort her and debts that exceeded the value of everything she owned. The banker, a pinched man named Cornelius Watts with spectacles that sat crooked on his narrow nose, had been almost apologetic when he laid out the grim reality. Thomas had taken loan after loan to expand the herd, to buy more grazing land, to purchase breeding stock that he swore would make them rich. Each gamble had failed to pay off the way he had promised. The cattle market had turned soft just as Thomas increased his herd. A drought had withered the grasslands he had purchased at premium prices. The breeding stock had produced calves, but not with the quality Thomas had predicted. And through it all, he had smiled at Amelia and told her not to worry her pretty head about the finances, that everything would work out fine. She had believed him because she loved him, and because she had no reason not to trust the man who had vowed to cherish and protect her. Now he was gone, thrown from a spooked horse during a thunderstorm, his neck broken instantly according to the doctor who had examined him. And Amelia was left holding papers that detailed obligations totaling nearly $8,000 against a property that Watts valued at perhaps $5,000 in current market conditions. You could sell, Watts had suggested, his fingers drumming on her kitchen table. Pay off what you can, start fresh somewhere else. You are still young, Mrs. Harper. You could return to your family, perhaps find another husband who could provide for you properly. The suggestion had made her blood boil even as fear clutched at her heart. This ranch was all she had left of Thomas, of the dreams they had shared, even if those dreams had been built on foundations more fragile than she had known. The house itself was small but solid, built by Thomas's own hands with lumber shipped from Oregon. The barn could hold 30 horses comfortably. The grazing land stretched over 400 acres of rolling hills that turned golden in summer and green in the wet season. There were cattle still, nearly 200 head that bore the Harper brand. There were horses in the corral, chickens in the coop, and a vegetable garden that she tended herself. This was her home, the only real home she had ever known since leaving her parents' house in Sacramento. "I will not sell," she had told Watts, lifting her chin in defiance even as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. There must be another way. Watts had sighed and gathered his papers. "The notes come due over the next 8 months, Mrs. Harper. The first payment of $1,000 is expected by July 1st. That gives you 10 weeks. If you cannot meet these obligations, the bank will have no choice but to foreclose. I am sorry, truly I am, but business is business." That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Amelia had tried everything she could think of to raise money. She had sold her wedding ring and the pearl necklace that had been her mother's, gaining only $140. She had sold 2 horses to a buyer in town for $75. She had sold eggs and vegetables at the market every Saturday, earning a few dollars here and there. But it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. She needed $1,000 in 7 weeks, and she had managed to scrape together barely $215. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard pulled her from her dark thoughts. Amelia wiped her eyes quickly and moved to the window, expecting to see one of the neighboring ranchers or perhaps someone from town. Instead, she saw a lone rider on a rangy dun gelding, leading a pack horse behind him. The man sat tall in the saddle despite the dust that covered him from his battered hat to his worn boots. He looked like he had been riding for days, maybe weeks. As he drew closer to the house, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably not yet 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. Amelia's hand went instinctively to the rifle that hung beside the door. A woman alone on a ranch had to be careful, especially with drifters and strangers. But something about the way the man sat his horse, calm and respectful, not pushy or aggressive, made her pause. She watched as he reined in about 20 feet from the house and removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Madam," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty yard. "I am looking for work. Wondered if you might have need of a hand." Amelia opened the door but kept one hand on the rifle, not threatening but ready. Up close, she could see that the stranger had gray eyes that looked tired but honest, and a face that might have been handsome under better circumstances. His clothes were worn but clean, his gear well maintained despite its age. The horses he rode looked sound and well cared for, which spoke well of his character. "I have no money to pay hired hands," she said, her voice coming out sharper than she intended. "I can barely feed myself, let alone take on help." The stranger nodded as if he had expected this answer. "I noticed your fences need mending as I rode in. Some of your cattle are wandering onto the road. That is dangerous for them and for travelers. I could fix that up for you in exchange for meals and a place to sleep in your barn. Would not ask for wages, just food and shelter for a while." Amelia studied him suspiciously. "Why would you work for nothing? What is your game?" "No game, madam. I have been on the trail a long time and my horses need rest." "I need rest. I have a little money set aside, but it would go further if I could work for room and board rather than paying for hotel rooms and restaurant meals. And I am good with my hands. I can fix things, work cattle, break horses if needed. Seems like you could use the help if you do not mind my saying so." It was true that the ranch was falling apart around her. With Thomas gone, there was no one to handle the heavy work. The fences were sagging in a dozen places. The barn roof leaked. The cattle were scattered across the property without anyone to keep them grouped properly. She had been trying to do it all herself, but she was only one person and there were not enough hours in the day. "What is your name?" she asked. "Yates Prescott, madam. I have been working ranches up and down California for the past 8 years. I know cattle and horses, and I am not afraid of hard work." "Where are you from originally?" "Texas, madam. I came west after my folks passed on. Been drifting mostly, working where I could find it." Something in his voice when he mentioned his family touched a chord in Amelia's heart. She recognized the sound of loss, of grief that had been weathered but not forgotten. Against her better judgment, she found herself lowering her hand from the rifle. "I am Amelia Harper. This is the Harper Ranch, or what is left of it. My husband died 2 months ago, and I am trying to keep things going on my own. I can offer you 3 meals a day and a place in the barn, but that is all. If you want money, you will have to look elsewhere." Yates Prescott put his hat back on and nodded. 3 meals and a dry place to sleep is more than fair, Mrs. Harper. I will work hard for you. You have my word on that. Where would you like me to start? She hesitated for just a moment longer, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. But desperation and exhaustion won out over caution. Put your horses in the corral and get them settled. There is feed in the barn. Then I will show you what needs doing. She watched as Yates rode toward the corral, his movements easy and practiced. The way he dismounted and began unsaddling his horses showed that he had been telling the truth about knowing his way around a ranch. He worked efficiently, checking his horses' hooves and rubbing them down before turning them loose in the corral with fresh water and hay. Amelia went back inside and put together a quick meal of cold chicken, bread, and canned peaches. It was not much, but it was what she had. When Yates knocked on the door 20 minutes later, his face scrubbed clean at the pump and his hat in his hands, she invited him to sit at the kitchen table. You should know the situation here, she said as she set the plate before him. This ranch is mortgaged beyond its value. My husband took loans that I knew nothing about, and now the bank is calling them due. I owe $1,000 by July 1st and several more payments after that. I have $215. Unless I can sell off a large portion of the herd, I am going to lose everything. So if you are looking for steady employment, this is probably not the place for you. Yates ate slowly, considering her words. How many head of cattle do you have? About 190, last count I made. What are they bringing at market right now? Around $22 a head for steers, less for cows and calves. Yates did the math in his head. If you sold half your herd, you would make maybe $2,000. That would cover the first payment and give you breathing room for the second. But then, I would have no way to generate income going forward. The ranch cannot survive on 90 head. That is barely enough to sustain itself, let alone generate profit to pay off the remaining notes. What about horses? Can you breed and train horses? Amelia shook her head. Thomas always focused on cattle. I have a few good horses, but not enough to build a breeding program, and I do not have the knowledge to train them for sale. I do, Yates said quietly. I have trained horses for some of the best ranches in Texas and California. If you have decent stock and some time, we could build something. Trained horses bring good money, much better than cattle in the current market. She wanted to feel hope at his words, but hope had proven to be a dangerous thing. That is very kind of you, Mr. Prescott, but training horses takes months and I have weeks. The math does not work out. Yates finished his meal and pushed the plate away. Maybe not for the first payment. But you said you have more payments after that. What if we could make the ranch profitable enough to handle those? Would the bank work with you if you showed them you could meet your obligations? I suppose they might, but it is a big if. Let me look around tomorrow, see what you have to work with. Maybe there is a solution neither of us has thought of yet. Amelia wanted to tell him not to bother, that the situation was hopeless and he should save his energy. But she was too tired to argue, and some small part of her that refused to give up wanted to hear what he might suggest after he had seen the full scope of the operation. That night, she lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She had grown so used to being alone in this house that it felt strange to know someone else was sleeping in the barn, someone who had appeared out of nowhere and offered to help for nothing more than food and shelter. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. In the morning, she would likely discover that Yates Prescott was either a fool or a scoundrel. But for tonight, for just this one night, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, things might work out after all. The sun was barely above the horizon when Amelia heard Yates moving around outside. She dressed quickly and went out to find him already at work, examining the fences that surrounded the main corral. He had a notebook in his hand and was making sketches and notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You are up early," she called out as she approached. He looked up and gave her a slight smile. "Old habit. I like to get started before the heat of the day. What have you found so far? These fences need a lot of work, but the posts are still good." "It is mostly a matter of replacing boards and tightening wire. The barn roof needs patching, but that is not too difficult. Your cattle are scattered to hell and gone, pardon my language, but that is manageable once we get them rounded up and sorted. How long do you think all that would take?" "With 2 of us working, maybe 3 weeks to get everything back in proper order. That is assuming we work from dawn to dusk and do not run into any major problems. 3 weeks of hard labor would bring them to mid-May. That would still leave 6 weeks before the first payment was due, but it would not put any money in her pocket. Still, having the ranch in good repair might make it more attractive to buyers if it came to that, or it might impress the banker enough to grant her an extension." She had to try something. "What would you need from me?" she asked. "Just point me in the right direction and maybe help with the cattle roundup when we get to that point. Otherwise, I can handle most of it on my own. I have to go into town today for supplies. I will be gone most of the day." "That is fine. I will start on the fences." Amelia hitched up the wagon and made the 8-mile journey into San Pedro, her mind turning over problems that seemed to have no solutions. The town was bustling with its usual morning activity when she arrived. Ships rocked at anchor in the harbor, their masts creating a forest of wooden poles against the blue sky. Longshoremen hauled cargo from the docks while merchants hawked their wares and children ran through the streets chasing hoops and each other. She made her way to the general store and purchased the few supplies she could afford with the money she had scraped together. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, lard. The basics. Nothing extra, nothing for pleasure or comfort. As she was loading her purchases into the wagon, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Amelia Harper, as I live and breathe. I heard you were struggling out there all alone." She turned to find Margaret Sutton, wife of the largest rancher in the area, regarding her with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been satisfaction at seeing a competitor fallen on hard times. Margaret was a handsome woman in her early 40s, dressed in clothes that spoke of money and position. "I am managing, Mrs. Sutton," Amelia said, keeping her voice neutral. "Are you really? I heard the bank is about to foreclose on the Harper place. Such a shame. Your husband was always so ambitious, always reaching for more than he could grasp." The words stung because they were true, but Amelia refused to show how deeply they cut. "The situation is difficult but not impossible." Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial manner. "You know, my husband might be willing to buy you out. He would give you a fair price, probably more than the bank would after foreclosure. You could walk away with something in your pocket, start fresh. It would be the smart thing to do." "The smart thing would be to honor my husband's memory by keeping his ranch running." "His ranch is already dead, my dear. You are just too stubborn to bury it." Amelia climbed onto the wagon seat without another word and snapped the reins, leaving Margaret Sutton standing in the street. Her hands were shaking with anger and humiliation as she drove out of town. People were talking about her situation, probably placing bets on how long she would last before she had to sell. The thought made her sick. When she arrived back at the ranch, she found Yates stripped to his undershirt, his arms and back glistening with sweat as he worked on replacing a section of fence. He had already completed a remarkable amount of work, with at least 50 feet of fence repaired and sturdy. He looked up as she approached, and she saw genuine concern cross his face. "Are you all right, Mrs. Harper? You look upset." She wanted to snap at him, to tell him it was none of his business, but the kindness in his voice broke through her defenses. I ran into someone in town who made it very clear that everyone expects me to fail. They are probably right, but I hate that they are all watching and waiting for it to happen. Yates set down his hammer and walked over to the wagon, beginning to unload her supplies without being asked. People like to see others fail because it makes them feel better about their own problems. You ignore them and focus on what you can control. And what if what I can control is not enough? Then at least you will know you tried everything, but we are not at that point yet, not by a long shot. His confidence was almost annoying in its certainty, but it was also oddly comforting. Amelia helped him carry the supplies into the house, then went to change into her work clothes. If Yates was going to work from dawn to dusk, then so would she. She would not let anyone say she had given up without a fight. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Yates worked on the fences, the barn, and the various other repairs the ranch needed. Amelia tended to the garden, the chickens, and the cooking. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and discuss the next day's work over simple dinners. Yates never asked for more than she had offered, never complained about the plain food or the hard work, never made her feel uncomfortable about being a woman alone with a strange man. She learned that he was 28 years old, that he had left Texas after losing his parents and his younger sister to a fever outbreak. He had been engaged to a girl back home, but she had married someone else when he stayed away too long. He talked about these painful things matter-of-factly, without seeking sympathy or dwelling on the past. He seemed to live entirely in the present moment, focused on the task at hand. Amelia found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the sound of another voice in the house besides her own. Yates had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she had thought she might never laugh again. He listened when she talked about Thomas, about the good times before the weight of debt had crushed her husband's spirit. He never judged Thomas for his mistakes or suggested that Amelia should have known what was happening. He simply listened and understood. 3 weeks after Yates arrived, the ranch looked better than it had in years. The fences were tight and true. The barn had a new roof that would keep out the rain. The cattle had been rounded up and sorted, with the calves branded and the herd grazing in proper pastures, instead of scattered across 400 acres. Amelia had expected Yates to move on once the immediate repairs were completed, but he showed no sign of leaving. "I have been thinking about your horse situation," he said one evening as they ate dinner. "You have 6 mares in your herd, all of decent quality, and that bay stallion of yours is a fine animal, probably worth training for sale on his own. If we can get those mares bred to good studs, you could have 6 foals next spring that would be worth training. In 3 years, those horses could be bringing in $300 each, maybe more if we do the job right." 3 years is a long time, Amelia said. "I need money in 3 months. "I know, but I am talking about building something sustainable. Even if you have to sell off some cattle to make the first payment, you could keep the ranch viable long-term with a horse operation. You keep saying we. You are not planning to stay here for 3 years, Mr. Prescott." He looked at her across the table, his gray eyes serious. "Why not? I do not have anywhere else I need to be, and I would like to see this through if you will have me." Amelia felt her heart beat faster. "I still cannot pay you wages. I told you that from the beginning." "I am not asking for wages. Room and board is enough for me." "Why? Why would you do this?" Yates was silent for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Because I am tired of drifting, because I want to build something that matters. And because I think you deserve better than to lose everything your husband built, even if he made mistakes along the way." The honesty in his voice made tears spring to Amelia's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting to appear weak. "I do not understand you, Yates Prescott. You show up here out of nowhere and work yourself half to death for nothing more than meals and a place to sleep. Either you are the most generous man in California, or there is something you are not telling me." "I am not generous. I am just practical. This is a good situation for both of us. You need help, and I need a place to land for a while. That is all." But it was not all, and they both knew it. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had expected or asked for. It showed itself in small ways. The way Yates always made sure Amelia's water bucket was filled before she had to carry it herself. The way Amelia saved the best pieces of meat for Yates at dinner. The way they talked long into the evenings, sharing stories and dreams and fears. The way their eyes would meet across the yard and hold for just a moment too long before one of them looked away. Amelia fought against these feelings, telling herself it was too soon, that Thomas had been dead barely 3 months, that she was being foolish and inappropriate. But the heart does not follow rules or timelines. She found herself thinking about Yates at odd moments during the day, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to seeing him at meals. She noticed things about him that she had not paid attention to at first. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. The small scar above his left eyebrow. The way he smiled with just one corner of his mouth when something amused him. June arrived with typical California sunshine, and with it came the looming deadline for the first payment. Amelia had sold 30 head of cattle to a buyer from Los Angeles, netting $660. Combined with what she had already saved, it brought her total to $875. She was still $125 short, and she had run out of things to sell. "I am going to lose it," she said to Yates on the evening of June 28th. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I am $125 short, and the payment is due in 3 days. Yates reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and counted out coins and bills onto the porch between them. $130. "It is everything I have saved, but I want you to have it." Amelia stared at the money in shock. "I cannot take your savings. That is your money, Yates. What good is money if I do not use it for something that matters? This matters, you matter. But why? Why would you give me everything you have?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a job and started being something more. "Because I care about what happens to you and this ranch, because I want to see you succeed." Amelia felt tears rolling down her cheeks. "I cannot accept this. It is too much. It is not enough, but it is what I have. Please, Amelia, let me help you." It was the first time he had called her by her first name instead of Mrs. Harper, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. She looked at the money, then at him, then back at the money. Pride warred with desperation and necessity. Pride lost. "I will pay you back," she whispered. "Every penny, I swear it. I know you will, but there is no hurry. We have time." The next morning, Amelia rode into San Pedro with $1,005 in her saddlebags. She went directly to the bank and asked to see Cornelius Watts. The banker ushered her into his office with the same apologetic expression he always wore. "Mrs. Harper, I hope you have good news for me. The payment is due tomorrow." She opened her bag and began counting out money onto his desk. Bills and coins, everything she had scraped together through sacrifice and help from an unexpected source. When she finished, she looked up at Watts with her chin raised. $1,005. That is the first payment plus a little extra to show good faith. The money is on time, Mr. Watts. The Harper Ranch is still in business. Watts counted the money carefully, then filled out a receipt and handed it to her. I confess I am surprised. Where did you find the funds? I sold cattle and found other ways to economize. And I will continue to do so for the remaining payments. The next payment of $800 is due August 1st. Can you make that as well? I will make all the payments, Mr. Watts. I am not giving up my ranch without a fight. The banker studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you might just do it, Mrs. Harper. Thomas always said you had steel in your spine. I am beginning to think he was right. Amelia rode home feeling lighter than she had in months. She had made the first payment. The bank could not foreclose, at least not yet. She had bought herself 2 more months to figure out how to make the next payment and the one after that. It was not a solution, but it was a reprieve. When she reached the ranch, she found Yates working with the bay stallion in the round pen, getting the horse used to the saddle. He looked up as she approached, and the question in his eyes was clear. "We made it," she called out. "The payment is made." A grin broke across his face, transforming his usually serious expression into something boyish and joyful. He vaulted over the fence and walked toward her, and before either of them could think better of it, she had dismounted and thrown her arms around him. He caught her and held her, and for a moment they stood there in the dusty yard, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for everything." "We are not finished yet," he said, his voice rumbling under her ear. "We still have a long road ahead, I know. But we made it this far, that is something." She pulled back and looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were, how good it felt to be held by someone strong and steady. She saw the same awareness in his eyes, saw the way his gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before he stepped back carefully. "I should get back to working with this horse," he said, his voice slightly rough. "He is coming along well. I think we can have him ready to sell in another month." Amelia nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. "I will start dinner." That evening was different from the ones that had come before. There was a new awareness between them, a tension that was not quite uncomfortable but definitely present. They ate dinner mostly in silence, stealing glances at each other when they thought the other was not looking. When Yates finally excused himself to go to the barn, Amelia sat alone in her kitchen and forced herself to confront what was happening. She was falling in love with Yates Prescott. It seemed impossible, seemed too fast, seemed wrong somehow when Thomas had been dead less than 4 months. But the heart knows no proper timeline for healing or for loving again. And if she was being honest with herself, what she felt for Yates was different from what she had felt for Thomas. She had loved her husband, but it had been the love of a young girl for a charming man who promised her the world. What she felt for Yates was the love of a woman who had been tested by life and found someone who stood beside her through the storm. July passed in a blur of work and worry and stolen moments. Yates sold the bay stallion to a rancher from Santa Barbara for $350, a sum that made Amelia's jaw drop. He had 3 more horses in various stages of training, and he assured her they would each bring similar prices when they were ready. The remaining cattle were thriving on the well-managed pastures, gaining weight for the fall market. The ranch was actually starting to function like a real operation again. But more than that, Amelia and Yates were starting to function like partners. They planned together, worked together, made decisions together. She learned to trust his judgment on things she did not understand, and he learned to value her instincts about the land and the animals. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity that came from long association, even though they had only known each other for 2.5 months. The question of their relationship, of what they were becoming to each other, hung unspoken between them. Neither wanted to risk the fragile balance they had achieved by addressing it directly. But it was there in every shared smile, every accidental touch, every lingering look. One evening in late July, Amelia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when a sudden summer storm rolled in from the ocean. Thunder cracked overhead and rain began to pour down in sheets, driven by strong winds. She was pulling bread from the oven when the kitchen door burst open and Yates stumbled in, soaked to the bone. "Sorry," he said, water streaming from his hat. "The storm came up so fast I could not make it to the barn. I will wait it out here if that is all right." "Of course. Let me get you a towel." She hurried to her bedroom and returned with a towel and one of Thomas's old shirts. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch a chill. You can change in the other room." When Yates emerged a few minutes later wearing Thomas's shirt, Amelia felt a strange pang. The shirt was too small for Yates across the shoulders, pulling tight in a way it never had on Thomas's leaner frame. It brought home how different the two men were. Thomas had been smooth-talking and ambitious, always chasing the next big opportunity. Yates was quiet and steady, focused on building something sustainable rather than getting rich quick. "I am sorry," Yates said, noticing her expression. "I should not be wearing his clothes." "No, it is fine. It is just strange sometimes, seeing pieces of his life being used by someone else. But he would have wanted his things to be useful rather than packed away in a trunk." Thunder crashed again, loud enough to rattle the windows. Amelia flinched, and Yates moved closer instinctively. "Are you afraid of storms?" "Not usually. But the storm that killed Thomas was like this. Every time I hear thunder like that, I remember the night they brought him home soaked and broken." "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was like the world ended. One minute I had a husband and a life, and the next minute everything was different. I did not know about the debts then. That came later. At first it was just grief and loneliness and feeling so lost." Yates stepped even closer, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite his damp clothes. "And now I still miss him sometimes, but I am not lost anymore. I know what I need to do, and I have help doing it." "Amelia," he said softly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What?" "I am not good with words, so I am just going to say it plain. I have feelings for you, more than just partnership feelings. I think about you all the time, and I care about you more than I probably should, considering how long we have known each other. I know it is too soon after losing Thomas, and I know I am just a drifter with no prospects, but I needed you to know." Amelia looked up at him, at the honesty and vulnerability in his gray eyes, and felt something break loose inside her chest. "It is not too soon," she whispered. "And you are not just a drifter. You are the man who saved my ranch. You are the man who works himself to exhaustion for nothing but meals and a place to sleep. You are the man who gave me everything you had so I could keep my home. You are the man I think about every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep." "Amelia," he said again. And this time it was not a beginning but a question and a plea and a promise all at once. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him, gentle and tentative at first, then with more confidence as he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. He kissed her back with a fierce tenderness that made her knees weak, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious and fragile. The storm raged outside, but inside the little kitchen there was only warmth and connection and the feeling of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know that might seem crazy after only knowing you a few months, but it is true. I love you, Amelia Harper." "I love you too," she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I do not know what that means for us, but I love you. It means we figure it out together, just like we have been doing with everything else." The storm passed, and they stood in the kitchen holding each other as the rain gentled and the thunder moved away into the distance. Amelia knew that there would be complications, that people would talk about the widow falling for the hired hand so soon after her husband's death. But for the first time in months, she felt genuinely happy. She felt hope not just for the ranch but for her future, for a life that might include love and partnership and joy. That night, after Yates had returned to the barn and Amelia lay in her bed, she thought about Thomas. She whispered an apology to his memory for moving on so quickly, but also a thank you for the years they had shared. She hoped wherever he was, he understood that she needed to keep living, to keep loving, to keep building the life he had started but could not finish. She thought he would approve of Yates, would respect the way the cowboy had stepped up to help when help was most needed. August arrived with the second payment looming on the horizon. Between the sale of the bay stallion, another 20 head of cattle, and some horses Yates had trained and sold, Amelia had the $800 she needed. She made the payment on July 31st, one day early, and watched Cornelius Watts's eyebrows rise in surprise. "I must admit, Mrs. Harper, I did not expect you to make it this far. You have proven me wrong." "I had help," she said simply. "The drifter who showed up at your place a few months back. I heard he was still around. His name is Yates Prescott, and he is not a drifter. He is my business partner." Watts made a notation in his ledger. "Your next payment of $1,500 is due October 1st. That is the final balloon payment. If you can make that, the ranch is yours free and clear. Do you think you can do it? $1,500 in 2 months." It seemed like an impossible sum, but she had thought that about all the other payments too. "I will do my best." When she returned to the ranch, she found Yates waiting for her in the yard. The look on his face told her he already knew she had made the payment. She had barely dismounted before he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "One more," he said when he set her down. "One more payment and this place is ours." "Ours," she repeated, loving the sound of it. "When did it become ours instead of mine?" "When I decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life here with you, if you will have me." Amelia looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, this man who had asked for nothing and given everything. "Is that a proposal, Yates Prescott?" "I suppose it is, though not a very romantic one. I do not have a ring to offer you, and I am covered in dust and probably smell like horses. But I love you, Amelia, and I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to build a life here together, raise horses and cattle and maybe a family someday. I want to grow old with you on this ranch, watching sunsets from that porch and working side by side every day. What do you say?" Tears streamed down Amelia's face, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." They were married on a warm August afternoon in the little church in San Pedro, with only a handful of people in attendance. The minister who had presided over Thomas's funeral looked uncomfortable at first, clearly thinking it was too soon for the widow to remarry. But when he saw the way Amelia and Yates looked at each other, the love and respect that passed between them without words, his expression softened. There were whispers, of course. Margaret Sutton made sure everyone knew that the widow Harper had taken up with a cowboy barely 4 months after putting her first husband in the ground. Some called it scandalous, others called it practical, and a few quietly said it was about time Amelia found someone who would actually take care of her properly. Amelia did not care what people said. She was happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yates had moved from the barn into the house, and they worked together to make it feel like a home for both of them. She packed away Thomas's things respectfully, keeping the memories but making room for new ones. Yates brought his own touches to the place, small things that marked it as his too. A shelf for his books, a place for his saddle and gear, his hat hanging by the door next to hers. They fell into married life with the same easy partnership that had marked their working relationship. Amelia discovered that Yates had a gift for making her laugh, for finding joy in small moments. He discovered that she was stronger than she looked, capable of handling hard work and hard decisions without flinching. They complemented each other, filled in each other's gaps, made each other better, but the specter of the final payment hung over them like a sword. $1,500 by October 1st. They had 2 months to find it, and time was running out. We could sell more cattle, Amelia suggested one evening as they went over the ranch accounts. We are already down to 140 head. If we sell much more, we will not have enough breeding stock to sustain the herd. What about the horses in training? They are not ready yet. We could sell them green, but we would get maybe half what they are worth trained. That would be throwing money away. Amelia rubbed her eyes, exhausted from another long day of work. There has to be something we are missing, some way to make this work. Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ledger. Then he looked up at her with an expression she could not quite read. There is one thing. I did not want to mention it because it is risky, but we are running out of options. What is it? There is a horse auction in Los Angeles in 3 weeks. Big buyers from all over the state, some from as far away as Arizona and Nevada. If we took our trained horses there, we could potentially double or triple what we would get selling them locally. But it costs money to enter the auction, and there is no guarantee we would get good prices. If the horses do not sell or sell low, we would be worse off than we started. How much does it cost to enter? $50 per horse. We have 3 ready to show, so $150 total. Amelia did the math in her head. They had about $600 in cash right now from recent sales. If they spent $150 on auction fees and the horses did not sell well, they would be setting themselves back significantly. But if the horses did sell well, they could potentially make the entire $1,500 they needed. What do you think the chances are that it would work? Yates considered carefully. The horses are good quality, and I have trained them right. In a strong market with the right buyers, I think we could get $400 each, maybe more. But there is always risk. A bad day, a spooked horse, wrong buyers in attendance, and we could end up with half that. So we could make $1,200, or we could make $600 and be out the entry fees. That is about right. Amelia looked at her husband, this man who had proven himself trustworthy time and time again. What does your gut tell you? My gut says the horses are ready and we need to take the chance. But it is your ranch, Amelia. You make the call. It is our ranch now, she corrected him. And if you think we should do it, then we do it. I trust you, Yates. The decision made, they spent the next 3 weeks preparing for the auction. Yates worked the horses daily, making sure they were at their absolute best. Amelia helped where she could, but mostly she handled the ranch work that could not be neglected while Yates focused on the horses. She fed cattle, tended the garden, kept the books, and worried endlessly about whether they were making the right choice. The night before they were to leave for Los Angeles, Amelia could not sleep. She lay beside Yates in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing and trying to calm her racing thoughts. As if sensing her distress, he rolled over and gathered her into his arms. "It is going to work," he murmured against her hair. "Trust me." "I do trust you. I am just scared. So am I, but we have come too far to give up now. Tomorrow we take our shot, and whatever happens, we face it together." They left before dawn, leading the 3 trained horses behind the wagon. The journey to Los Angeles took the better part of 2 days, camping overnight on the trail. It gave Amelia time to appreciate the beauty of the California landscape, the way the land changed from coastal hills to broader valleys as they traveled. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten to look up and see the world around her. Los Angeles was bigger than San Pedro, a bustling city that seemed to grow larger every time Amelia visited. The auction was being held at the stockyards on the edge of town, in a large covered arena that could hold several hundred people. As they arrived and began the registration process, Amelia felt her stomach twist with anxiety. This was it. This was their chance to save the ranch or lose everything. The auction itself was a revelation. Amelia had never seen anything like it. The rapid-fire patter of the auctioneer, the subtle signals from buyers, the way prices could jump or plummet based on factors she did not fully understand. Yates entered their horses in the afternoon session, which he said was prime time for serious buyers. The first horse, a chestnut mare with excellent gaits and a calm temperament, went up for bidding around 2 in the afternoon. Yates had set a reserve price of $300, the minimum they would accept. The bidding started at $200 and climbed slowly. $300, $325, $350. Amelia held her breath as the numbers climbed higher. $400, $425. The auctioneer called for more bids, but the room had gone quiet. Going once, going twice, sold for $425. Amelia wanted to jump up and down with joy, but she forced herself to remain calm. 1 horse sold, 2 to go. The second horse, a powerful buckskin gelding, drew immediate interest from several buyers. The bidding was fierce, driving the price up quickly. $450, $500. Amelia could hardly believe what she was hearing. The horse finally sold for $530 to a rancher from Nevada who planned to use him as breeding stock. The final horse, a pretty gray mare with a sweet disposition, sold for $410 to a family from Pasadena who wanted a gentle horse for their teenage daughter to ride. When the dust settled and the auction house took their commission, Amelia and Yates walked away with $1,315. Combined with the $600 they had at home, they would have more than enough to make the final payment with money left over. They spent that night in a small hotel in Los Angeles, too exhausted and elated to make the journey home. Lying in the narrow hotel bed, Amelia turned to Yates with tears in her eyes. "We did it. We actually did it. The ranch is saved." Yates pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You did it. You fought for your home when everyone said you should give up. You trusted a stranger who showed up on your doorstep with nothing but a horse and a promise. You worked harder than anyone should have to work. This is your victory, Amelia. It is our victory. I could never have done it without you. You gave me everything, asked for nothing, and loved me when I thought I could never love again. You are my miracle, Yates Prescott." They made love that night with a tenderness born of shared struggle and triumph, celebrating not just the money they had earned but the partnership they had built and the future they would share. When Amelia fell asleep in her husband's arms, she dreamed of the ranch as it would be, not struggling under debt but thriving as a testament to persistence and love. On September 28th, 3 days before the payment was due, Amelia and Yates walked into the bank in San Pedro. Cornelius Watts looked up from his desk with his usual expression of polite concern, but it shifted to surprise as Amelia dumped a canvas bag full of money onto his desk. $1,500, she announced. "The final payment on the Harper Ranch notes. Count it." Watts counted carefully, then counted again. When he finished, he looked up at them with something close to admiration. "It is all here." "Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Prescott, congratulations. As of today, your ranch is free and clear of all debt. I must say, I never thought I would be saying those words." "Neither did I," Amelia admitted. "But we made it happen." Watts prepared the paperwork, official documents declaring that all loans were satisfied and the property belonged entirely to Yates and Amelia Prescott. When he handed over the papers, his hand lingered for just a moment. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Prescott. When your late husband passed, I thought you would fold within a month. I underestimated you badly. You have proven to be one of the most determined and capable ranchers in this county. I wish you both many years of success." Walking out of the bank with the papers in hand felt like floating. The weight that had pressed down on Amelia for 6 months, that had stolen her sleep and filled her days with worry, was finally gone. She owned her land outright. She and Yates could build their future without the threat of foreclosure hanging over them. As they rode back to the ranch, Amelia looked at the land with new eyes. Every fence post, every building, every blade of grass belonged to them now. It was truly theirs, earned through hard work and sacrifice and love. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Yates took Amelia's hand in his. "What do you want to do now? We have a clean slate. We can build whatever kind of operation we want." "I want to focus on horses, like you suggested. The cattle can stay as a steady income source, but I think horses are where our future lies. With your training skills and my business sense, we could build something really special." "I like that idea. And maybe in a year or two we could think about adding to our family, if you want that." Amelia squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I want that very much. A child born into hope instead of desperation. A child who grows up on this ranch knowing it is secure and loved." "Then that is what we will do. We will build a horse ranch, raise a family, and prove that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest struggles." The months that followed were busy but joyful. Yates continued training horses, building a reputation throughout Southern California for quality work. Buyers started seeking them out specifically, willing to pay premium prices for horses that bore the Prescott Ranch training. Amelia managed the business side, keeping meticulous records and making smart decisions about which horses to breed, which to sell, and how to price their services. In the spring of 1884, they bred 5 of their mares to carefully selected studs, investing in the future of their operation. In March, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. Yates received the news with a whoop of joy that could probably be heard in town, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. The baby was born in late November, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas Yates Prescott, honoring both the man who had built the ranch and the man who had saved it. Amelia held her son and wept happy tears, thinking about how far she had come from that desperate widow who had thought her life was over. The following spring, the foals arrived. 5 healthy babies that would eventually be trained and sold, continuing the cycle of success. Yates built a larger barn to accommodate the growing operation. Amelia hired a woman from town to help with the housework and the baby, freeing her up to be more involved in the ranch operation again. As the years passed, the Prescott Ranch became known as one of the best horse operations in Southern California. People came from hundreds of miles away to purchase horses or to send their own animals for training. Yates took on apprentices, teaching young cowboys the skills he had learned over his lifetime. Amelia expanded into breeding, developing bloodlines that were prized for their soundness and temperament. They had 2 more children, a girl they named Sarah and another boy they called James. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with the laughter of children filling rooms that had once echoed with loneliness. Every evening, Amelia and Yates would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the sun set over land they had fought so hard to keep. Sometimes Amelia would think about that day when Yates had ridden into her yard, a dusty stranger looking for work. She would think about how close she had come to turning him away, to facing her struggles alone. She would think about how one moment of desperate trust had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Yates would ask, seeing the distant look in her eyes. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how we found each other at exactly the right moment. I am the lucky one. You gave me a purpose when I had none, a home when I was drifting, and a love I never expected to find. We saved each other," Amelia would say, and it was true. She had saved him from a life of wandering without roots or meaning. He had saved her from losing everything that mattered. Together, they had built something that neither could have achieved alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates presented Amelia with a gift. It was a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Los Angeles, showing the ranch as it looked now. The house gleamed white in the sunshine. The barns and corrals were full of horses. The fields were green and lush. And in the foreground, Yates and Amelia stood side by side, their children around them, looking out over the land they loved. "This is us," he said as she stared at the painting with tears in her eyes. "This is what we built from nothing. From debt and desperation, and a stranger showing up asking for work. This is our legacy." Amelia hung the painting in the living room where she could see it every day. It reminded her of how far they had come, of the struggles they had overcome, of the love that had sustained them through everything. When times were hard, as they sometimes still were, she would look at that painting and remember that she and Yates could face anything together. The children grew up strong and capable, learning the ranch business from the ground up. Thomas, the oldest, showed a natural talent for training horses like his father. Sarah had her mother's head for business and kept the books from the time she was 12. James loved the cattle more than the horses and took over that side of the operation as he got older. Cornelius Watts retired from the bank and was replaced by a younger man, but he would still stop by the ranch occasionally to visit. He never tired of telling the story of the widow who had saved her ranch against all odds, though Amelia always corrected him to say that she and Yates had saved it together. Margaret Sutton's husband's ranch eventually went bankrupt during a bad drought, and they were forced to sell to cover their debts. The irony was not lost on anyone in San Pedro. The Prescott Ranch, meanwhile, continued to thrive through good times and bad, a testament to careful planning and hard work. As Amelia and Yates grew older, they gradually turned over more of the daily operations to their children. But they never stopped working entirely, never stopped being involved in the place they had built together. They would walk the property holding hands, pointing out changes and improvements, remembering the early days when everything had seemed so impossible. "You ever regret it?" Amelia asked one day as they stood on a hill overlooking the ranch. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined by sun and wind and time. "Stopping here instead of moving on. You could have ended up anywhere, done anything. Instead, you chose to stay and work a struggling ranch for a desperate widow." Yates pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I have never regretted it for one single second. You and this ranch are the best things that ever happened to me. I was lost before I found you, Amelia. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start living. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Yates Prescott. I loved you when you first showed up dusty and tired asking for work. I loved you when you gave me every penny you had to save my ranch. I loved you when you married me and built this life with me, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Amelia Harper Prescott. You were worth every drop of sweat, every long day, every sacrifice. You were worth everything. They stood there together on that hill, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most and built a life that exceeded both their dreams. The ranch stretched out below them, alive with horses and cattle and the next generation of Prescotts carrying on the legacy. The years continued to pass, bringing joys and sorrows as all lives do. They lost friends and gained grandchildren. They weathered droughts and celebrated good years. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season until it was as much a part of them as breathing. On a warm evening in the spring of 1913, 30 years after Yates had first arrived at the ranch, Amelia sat on the porch with her husband. Thomas and his wife were running the operation now, with Sarah handling the business affairs and James managing the cattle operation. The Prescott Ranch employed 15 people and was considered one of the premier horse ranches in California. The dusty, struggling operation that Amelia had inherited from her first husband had been transformed into something magnificent. "We did good, did we not?" Amelia said, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. "We did better than good. We did great. I was thinking today about that first time you showed up here. I almost did not let you stay. I was so suspicious, so afraid. What if I had turned you away? But you did not. You took a chance on a stranger and look what came of it. The best 30 years of my life." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Mine too. Every single day with you has been a gift, Amelia." As the sun set over the Prescott Ranch, painting the California sky in brilliant colors, Amelia leaned against her husband and felt complete. She had lost everything once, and had fought her way back with the help of a cowboy who had asked for nothing and given everything. She had built a life of purpose and meaning, had raised children who would carry on the legacy, had loved and been loved in return with a depth that most people never experience. The ranch that had been buried under unpaid notes was now thriving and debt-free, a testament to determination, hard work, and the transformative power of love. The cowboy who had worked it free asking for nothing had gained everything that mattered. And the widow who had thought her life was over had discovered that sometimes endings are just new beginnings in disguise. In the distance, horses ran across the fields their children and grandchildren would inherit. The land that Thomas had claimed, and Yates had saved, and Amelia had fought for would continue for generations. A piece of California history built on sacrifice and sustained by love. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Amelia and Yates sat together on the porch where they had sat so many evenings before, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built side by side. The story of the widow's ranch and the cowboy who saved it would be told for years in San Pedro, passed down as a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected blessings come disguised as strangers on dusty horses, that love can bloom even in the hardest soil, that asking for help is not weakness but wisdom, and that the greatest legacies are built not on wealth or status, but on the simple courage to keep fighting when everything seems lost. Amelia Harper Prescott and Yates Prescott lived long lives filled with love, purpose, and the satisfaction of work well done. They died within months of each other in their 80s, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who all bore the mark of their legacy. The Prescott Ranch continued to operate for another 50 years under family management before eventually being sold, but its story lived on in local history as a testament to what could be accomplished when desperation met determination, when fear gave way to faith, and when a widow took a chance on a cowboy who appeared out of nowhere asking only for a place to belong. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across those California hills, some say you can still see them sitting on that porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset over the land they loved and the life they built together. A widow and a cowboy whose love story proved that sometimes the greatest treasures in life come not from what we ask for, but from what we are willing to give.